explore the unconventional things. Everything from that ski bum stuff to at first, but it was just that was just to get my feet in San Francisco essentially, and then finding a way into a biotech. So definitely explore the unconventional, because you might find something that you really love. If you're thinking it's time to move away from the bench, what are some things you loved about the bench that were really that are things you can take with you, so that you're because I honestly, my PhD has felt like I've used it throughout my entire career.
Hey folks, welcome to another edition of the Next Step podcast. I'm Jeff Kozlowski, a marketing strategist here at the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry, supporting our graduate education and postdoctoral affairs. Today, I'm excited to welcome Jamie Butler to the show. Jamie is a 2002 graduate of our biophysics PhD program and now works as the vice president of marketing at Hamamatsu, a leading company of light and technology products. Jamie joined us to talk about his graduate school experience, coming to Rochester from the Bay Area, how his program contributed to his love of technology, and how he took a year off from his career for some personal reasons, and how that played out and affected his journey. He also talks about jumping into sales as a first job after graduate training, which is at least for this alumni interview series is a first, and talks about how he ultimately worked his way up to where he is now as VP of marketing at Hamamatsu. And here's our conversation. Enjoy. All right, Jamie, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Glad to.
How's the visit to Rochester so far?
Terrific. It's fun to be back. It's very nostalgic, actually. It's almost 20 years, and that was just a quick trip on the last time I was here. So
any particular restaurant, place that you have to go to?
So
while
big
you're here?
changes. So I last night we went to the Genny Brewery, and I was working with a marketing company up here in Rochester called Launch, and they suggested this right out over the water there in the river. And I remember the Genny Brewery really well, because it was sort of a fixture, but not the restaurant, which was, I guess, remodeled in 2012 or so. So
yep.
It was really cool.
All right.
Fun to see.
Well, enjoy the rest of your time here for sure.
Yeah.
And thanks for making time for us. So first, we'll get into your current role at Hamamatsu and your journey from there. But first, let's take it back just a few years to when you were considering graduate school.
Right.
How did you stumble upon University of Rochester, and what ultimately made you want to attend?
Yeah. So I did go to undergrad at Hamilton College, so I was familiar with upstate New York and knew the Rochester Med School and grad school here was always something that was on our radar for sure from those upstate areas. But I grew up in Connecticut, so I was an East Coaster. But basically, I had moved out after undergrad to my first thought was a ski bum, in a way, and I worked in a ski store in San Francisco, but the real goal was to kind of start to get into this new technology area. Biotechnology was kind of hopping at that point. Genentech was the sort of sweetheart of all of these biotechs space, and ended up getting a job at a spin-off of Genentech, Genencore, which was basically a combination of the name Genentech and Corning Glass, another upstate New York company. But crazy coincidence, Genencore also had a facility in Rochester. So it's still maybe just stuck in the back of my mind, but I applied to the U of R, and that was along with some of the California schools while I was out there. And that's how it got on my radar for the first time. Yeah. And
so you were working full time before you went back to do a PhD. What was that like? Kind of, being finished with undergrad, working for a little bit, then jumping back into graduate studies?
But at that stage, it wasn't that different because the work I was doing was pretty neat. It was bench work that then translated all the way up to production level bioprocessing. So everything from cuvettes and to flasks to then small fermenters to 100,000 liter fermenters that are in production in Iowa. So we would do a little bit of this pilot scale ramping. So it kind of just gave me a feel for what it's like to be in the lab, and then enjoy it. It was my first foray into microscopy too, because we would get we'd get whatever it was we were growing, usually bacteria, out and check on what their how healthy they were essentially, and what the production levels were for the protease or the enzyme you were trying to harvest. So that part, the working part, was interesting, and then it was like, okay, how do I advance this, and what do I do, and I want to go back to grad school, or do I go to med school, or that? And I settled on, I loved physics. I was a physics graduate out of undergrad. Said there was this field but I was heavily into bioscience as well, so biophysics seemed like a great fit. And Rochester's program, biophysics, was at the time, it was its own department. Later on, it became the Department of Biochemistry and Biophysics. But I came out here. I definitely applied here, and some of the universities in California had less of a cohesive actual biophysics program, I'd say. So then I got an interview at University of Rochester, and the overall warmth, the welcome that I received out here at U of R as a part of as I mentioned, cohesive department, and just the attitude of the students that took me out to dinner, it's really sold me on it. And one of the things that I learned later was that one of the professors who interviewed me for, I think he said, well, the guy seems pretty smart, that's fine. I don't want to talk to him about science. I just want to hear about how he climbed Denali. And this was Barry Goldstein at the time, because he was a climber, and he was like, there's no way he's going to come here. He's in California. And I'm like almost to prove him wrong, I ended up coming to Rochester. But this is what I had heard after the fact.
That's funny.
But generally the warmth, the how well they put the program together for the students and the grad students at Rochester definitely won out over Irvine's and Davis and things like that. Yeah.
And that you mentioned cohesiveness, warmth. A lot of folks mention, and we talked about it in conversations leading up to this, collaboration. That all of that, sort of seemed to be a theme throughout your graduate school journey here. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, just kind of then you're here, what that graduate school experience was like?
Yeah. So the first 2 years, the rotations are terrific. It kind of continues in that theme of let's get the students in front of as many people as we can, do lab rotations and learn what it is that they're really interested in. And I had no idea when I got here and landed in Rick Waugh's lab. And it had it turned out I liked the biomedical engineering and the microscopy side of it, which is going to be was the theme throughout my career, was microscopy. The technology was easily as fascinating to me as the science itself, and that's will be. I'm sure you'll see that as we get further into the discussion. But that first year in the rotations was terrific. I had a close relationship at that point of my wife to be was still on the West Coast, and she was looking into business schools. And so Simon at Rochester was one of her plans. She was interested in, and she got in there and to Cornell. So there was this possibility that she would move out, and then we would live here together and, you know, get married, and I'd be going to grad school here, and she'd be getting her MBA. But then her company told her that they would pay for it if she stayed out on the West Coast, and that threw a little bit of a wrench in there. So I started to talk to my advisor about, as my master's, as the point of the master's came up, this might be tricky for me to do it. It was amazing. I'm eternally grateful to the U of R for how this went down, but he was able to. He had a collaboration with another researcher at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, who had an appointment at UCSF as well, and he was able to. There was an interest in developing the technology from Rick Wall's lab here at University of Rochester out in California. So they worked in a collaboration, and I would go out there, and she could go to business school, and I could actually work in the lab out at Berkeley. And
being out there proved to be kind of a great move, being your interest in tech,
yeah,
being near, the sort of the biotech boom. Talk about just then, how your career started.
Yeah, sure. So I'll say that was amazing in so many ways. My feeling is by building that technology, it made me more employable ultimately. There was writing code for the microscopes, building up the system, working with this crazy Australian postdoc who just published or was publishing in PNAS, and they had a science paper that out on one of their techniques, so we were kind of collaborating with, and these were real, sort of advanced microscopy techniques at that point. And that part, exposure to all of that was really helpful. It added a couple of years to my, it absolutely, took longer for me to graduate. I mean, there was that part, I had to build a full lab from scratch, essentially. So that was I don't know, the downside, because what I did was learn all of these sort of unique techniques or in the microscopy, taught myself how essentially to code, to automate things, that sort of thing. So it made me more employable down the road. And when I ended up with a job at Nikon Instruments, it was a very good fit. They literally was using their microscopes prior to that and building unique systems off of them.
So this collaboration, or in this opportunity that U of R allowed you to do in going out to California, building up this lab and doing this collaborative work, opened you up to a career opportunity that you may not have even thought up before.
Yeah, and as I say, both my advisor and U of R and Mohan Narla at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab were just amazing at providing that opportunity to me. So I'm definitely grateful.
So what was the first step after completing grad school, and what happened?
So right after grad school, I did a short stint at what's called a lipsometry company. It's still imaging in ellipsometry, and it's usually used for thin film measurement and semiconductor deposition, where you're measuring the level of the whatever the substrate is you're adding. However, there was a push for these ellipsometers to move into the sort of bioscience world and to be used as like protein binding or antibody binding measurement systems, just to see because they can measure the difference in a layer at nanometer scale. So as soon as a protein binds, it detects it in the size as it actually adds to the substrate. That was a short, quick stint because Nikon Instruments at that time came by and said, "Hey, we got an open position." I loved microscopy, so ended up with Nikon in a couple of roles, one being sales.
Yeah.
And then at that time, sales was often done through distributors, so it was sort of a matrix management. You didn't have people directly reporting you. I was a senior applications manager, and I would work with the dealers and train the dealers and the distributors on how to use and just be impressive in front of all these researchers that they're at UCSF, where they're going in, and these guys are doing the cutting edge experiments on and cutting edge technology. They're actually building unique systems. Mats Gustafsson was one of these guys at UCSF that eventually Nikon bought the technology that he was developing on the microscope. So we made sure everybody was well trained on that front, and it was sales, and it was actually I got a feel for so many different things, so many different types of research. So I liked it, and then. The other part of that senior application manager job is training, as I mentioned, to dealers, but developing these relationships with key opinion leaders. And again, being fortunate to be out in San Francisco and UCSF with a big, cutting edge, and Stanford facilities. Those were the areas I was interacting with people. There was a guy named researcher Ron Vale, who's now the director of Janelia Farms and the vice president of Howard Hughes Medical Institute. And Ron, I met him at Woods Hole. So these are the opportunities I as a senior applications manager, I was afforded could go to these microscopy classes at Woods Hole, and we would support them as commercial faculty, and we'd be ultimately the guys. We'd give a lecture on how to use these systems to the best capability of the technology. Again, the science was done by lab directors, and they'd be pulling the squid neurons out and show them how to prep it and stuff like that. But then we'd give the lectures as commercial faculty on the methodology to really get the best out of the image and the techniques. And so, that Woods Hole experience, highly recommend to anybody. If you're a postdoc, usually you come in at the postdoc level. There's courses like advanced quantitative light microscopy that get you, take it that step further. But there's physiology courses there. There's frontiers in reproductive medicine, I think, is another one. They have a wide variety. And you're in Cape Cod. I mean, you're like loving it.
Not bad.
Spending the summer there. And so Ron would be the director of the course, and met him there, and kind of, I guess we hit it off because we ended up founding a company together later out of UCSF and incubating it. Yeah.
So talk about then, so you've been at Hamamatsu now for about how many years?
So 12 years at Hamamatsu.
Okay, so how did that role come about, and where did you start in that company?
Yeah, so I started at Hamamatsu in sales as well. Yeah, and there was cameras, but our cameras are pretty much entirely focused on microscopy.
Okay.
Pardon the pun, focus on microscopy. There's actually a meeting in Italy right now called Focus on Microscopy with all the top-end microscopists. So I would still get into that vein of researchers and the fields that they're in, and many of the people were using our cameras. But the actual reason I took the job at Hamamatsu was there was a period in between Nikon, and I didn't just sort of jump from Nikon to Hamamatsu. I was we just had our twins, and had an older one who was 4, and we were remodeling our house so my wife's mother could come and help with the kids, and then I could travel again, and it'd be great. And he's got 3 kids that you're under 5 that you're juggling, and both of you were working, so that was a big thing. Unfortunately, we learned a month into our remodel to make this sort of space in the new house for my mother-in-law. She had pancreatic cancer, and so we went from 2 to 2 infants and a 5-year-old to 2 infants and a 5-year-old and a cancer patient that my wife really needed to spend a lot of time with. And so then I took a year off and changed, and I focused on the kids and helped her focus on her mom for a few years. And sadly, she passed away, but she had a good pain-free 3 years, which was great.
Yeah.
And sometime in the middle of that, I was still like thinking, okay, I was off for about a year, but we founded. There's a lifestyle company with this group and this lab out of UCSF, Ron Bale's lab. That's when I mentioned we'd hit it off, and that lifestyle company was really based around an open source software called Micromanager. And we were going to do a Red Hat model where we basically brought in revenue around the open source code by providing services to corporations and labs that needed some level of new development. So there were 2 programmers, Nenad Ahmadaj and Nico Sturman, and they were also founding members of the company. And so that was my sort of foray into the startup world, and ultimately I think it's still going on. The Micromanager software was funded by NIH, but there's nothing prohibiting you to go and build a business around that open source software by providing services. Then during that period, I needed something a little more stable ultimately, and so the Hamamatsu thing came up. I didn't think I really wanted a job. There was still a little too much going on at home, but I'd heard this company was fantastic, and that they treated everybody really well, and so I interviewed and got the position, and as I mentioned, it was in sales, and it still had to do with microscopy, so it was a really good fit. And I ended up just sort of thriving there once everything settled down at home too.
And so taking it back to before we jump into Hamamatsu as a company, you mentioned you took a year off. I know that's not easy for somebody at that point in their career.
Right.
Not easy for anybody to say like I need to take a year off.
Right.
My wife took a year off from teaching to care for our first child, and I mean. It's hard to make that decision, especially, when you have a family to support, and so. But I've talked to other alums too, where things happen in the family, life, you can't really plan it, and things happen, and ultimately, it ends up being okay. Like that year didn't make or break your career.
Yeah. Yeah. I was lucky in that, and like I said, I think I pretty much tanked my interview with Hamamatsu because and it might have been on purpose because I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to work.
Yeah. And on top of that, I mean, you knew that time that was just something you wouldn't get back, and you wouldn't regret taking.
Right. But it was probably the best decision for both the company and me to say, okay, let's go forward with this, and it, in the early stages it was very flexible. Now I can't say.
Well, you have a very different role now. Yeah,
so,
well, and we'll get into that. So, but the first role, sales, not something that through this, at least this podcast anyway, and talking to alums, that a lot of our graduate school alumni get into. Different folks get into a form of like science communication or something like that, but sales, this is a first. So I want to, just talk a little bit. What was it sort of like jumping into the sales world?
Yeah, so I have an expressive personality. We have we do training, and we do all of the sales training. So actually, they teach you different personality types, and the nice thing about corporate sales programs are that you do get some training in that sense. They're not just thrown to the wolves, and that expressive personality sort of fits well with the the sales world in many ways. Mm-hmm. But it's also sometimes not quite what people assume it is. In Hamamatsu, well, let me just address some of the types of sales that occur. There's certainly, what I was doing was working with labs and trying to understand all these different research fields. We had products that we were promoting over other products, that's for sure, and we had to, like the Andors out there, our Hamamatsu our cameras were we were a little bit behind, and then we kind of leapfrogged, and all of a sudden things were a little bit easier because people are calling you for, hey, we need to see this new thing, because
not so much selling there.
As
right?
much as the PIs and labs and the postdocs love science and being at the bench, they love technology too. So it wasn't a difficult conversation. There's some things that were, I wasn't necessarily feeling like I had to cold call, but
Okay.
if you do, the people you do get to talk to are doing their own research, and they're saying, I need to solve this problem, and then finding ways to help them solve that problem is actually rewarding in itself. So that side of the sales was really not a stretch for me at all. I absolutely enjoyed it, solving problems, especially when people were happy in the labs. And let's face it, I was not one that wanted to stay at the bench. So I got to see samples of all of these different areas of research. And then I mentioned Woods Hole. I would be able to go, same thing with Hamamatsu, head out to Woods Hole and work at the course and be in commercial faculty to teach an imaging side of things. Why are these super resolution pixels weighted more heavily on one side than another, and how do you build that image? And those are the kinds of things that we were coaching with all these different researchers and students, because we knew the technology. So that sales in the sense that it wasn't really car sales, and I still had the science side of it, but it's also, there's frequently numbers, and it needs to make sense, but the flexibility to decide on where I could focus the efforts was probably Hamamatsu specific, more so than some of the other companies. Hamamatsu treats us, and we treat the employees as individuals that we hope can put some trust into. For sure.
Well, it probably helps too. You mentioned just your love of tech after you started getting it. It helps when you either are selling or helping your customers with something that you truly enjoy. It's not like a product that you couldn't care about. So that helps.
Just be passionate about it.
Exactly. So okay, you hit on the culture of Hamamatsu a little bit. You also mentioned you're in a very different role now than when you started 12 years ago, Vice President of Marketing. What does a day in the life look like for you now? There's probably not one same day in the life.
Yeah, somewhere in between there, I was in business development, which I'm going to say at this time was like the sweet spot, where it was marketing. We have at Hamamatsu, our sales force is actually mostly what's called OEM, original equipment manufacturing business. We're inside the guts. We're like Intel inside of things. The PMTs and flow cytometers that all the immunology students will recognize, or the PMTs and other types of detectors inside confocal microscopes, or the PET systems are entirely our detectors and scintillators for detection of positron emission tomography for cancer detection, or CT scans. We're the guts inside a lot of these systems, DNA sequencing, PCR. I can just ramble off a bunch of them, but that type of sale is very different, and so those OEM salespeople are focused, and we only hire engineers. They have to have a technical degree for that in that side of the business. And business development group in marketing looks at things that are 5 to 10 years out, and then works with those OEMs to say, okay, let's capture. Here's a new emerging technology, spatial omics. It's Nature Method of the Year 2020. And what can we do, and what can we provide all of these people that are diving into this field? It's like the Wild West right now. How do we get them to the throughputs and the costs and all of these things that they need for that. So that was the business development side. So it's a strategic, longer term thing. And that was in marketing. And I ran a group of that, but we also had business development managers for things like LiDAR. What are the emerging technologies? Autonomous driving vehicles, Waymo. You see it, the cars now in Arizona and in San Francisco, and they're actually picking people up and driving. And the LiDAR systems inside of all of those need near IR their sources and detectors. So that's another one. I mentioned X-ray and also spectroscopy are focuses of business development efforts in the marketing department. And then, so now on to my role. I'm still basically, it's only been 4 or 5 months, but we have to create a structure. So now it's more, I feel a lot more responsibility for the people.
Okay.
It's a lot more people.
Yeah.
And I feel, I want to make sure it's a rewarding environment, and we're trying to put in a structure that creates that path for the younger people to be promoted and to move up, and then see that level, I guess, taking it full circle, that ultimately be a BDM, a business development manager, when they start on as an application engineer right out of college, for example. And do they have a path? And in my mind, there's really 3 pillars, at least on Hamamatsu's marketing side, because as I mentioned, we do have this OEM sales force. They're already in place. What's the how does marketing support all of that? Along with, we do have an end user sales force as well that we're building, and it's actually growing quite a bit with digital pathology systems and drug discovery systems, and also high throughput screening systems that are coming onto the market now, and one spatial biology system. And so those 2 sides of the sales business need some level of support and structure and marketing. And for me, I think of it as sort of these 3 pillars of marketing. One is Marcom. Marcom is the communications, the branding. We go to conferences. In our world, it's a trade show. In the scientific community's world, it's a conference. You're going to an event, and you're presenting your poster. But behind the scenes, in all of that exhibit area, there's a ton of work, and there's a ton of freight and traveling and demo and what equipment to show and all of that stuff. So that's in my department as well. And that part is really interesting, but big budget. And then the second pillar would be product management. Right, about 95% of the product managers are probably in a marketing position at all the companies across the U.S. And they have to understand how the devices are used, how the instruments are used, and what the salespeople are there to create the relationship. But the product managers are focused on, we know that this is a big market. So, but we got to figure out why our instruments can do better. We're going to create content, and they work with Marcom on that. They all kind of connect to each other. And the last pillar is market research. So we do the research into things like spatial omics, where what's the total addressable market, what's the our accessible market, and what's our market share going to be. Those kinds of things are done in market research. BDMs tend to have all 3 of these pillars wrapped up by the time they're in that role, but the application engineers and the market research engineers are kind of working towards all of that. So that's how I look at it. But creating that rewarding environment for all those people is like, work from home now. All these things that we're changing. So we used to be all in the office, and now even I'm remote a lot because I travel.
Yeah, so you mentioned the culture is sort of what brought you in 12 years ago, or you at least brought you in for the interview. You'd heard it was a great place. Sounds like you have training, professional development opportunities in place. And those watching that may be interested in this, or interested in the same kind of tech, or the company in general. Any other What else is Hamamatsu doing for its employees? You mentioned, it sounds like it's top of mind for you, and what keeps you up at night is making sure you keep the your great talent and bring in great talent as well.
Yeah. The previous president was the vice president of marketing, and he says the same thing. It's like we've kind of both been given a gift. From the people that have built this company before us, and just being able to leave it as a better place by the time I'm done is probably the most important. And how I go about that is still like up for grabs. I think it's not just about revenue for sure. It's going to be many of the things we do are corporate events, and we did what's called a. Actually, this is a good thing to talk about. Is that in Japan, and we're closely. We have a much closer relationship than a lot of Japanese companies do. We go to Japan. We have training sessions in Japan. We do it from the application engineers all the way on up, and salespeople. Everybody gets a trip to Japan for training. Ultimately, it stopped a little bit during COVID, but we get over there and we get very engrossed in their culture. And so then that's one. Actually, everybody looks at it as a reward. Your 2-week training program in Japan, where you spend a weekend in Kyoto, and then visit each of the factories, is really looked on as like, when do I get to go?
Right, I can imagine.
That's one thing, and it's all across the board for people to do that. Then there's so they get to feel that their culture over there, where they're in the factory working. They're in their jackets and very it's all very rule oriented but focused. And then, so back in the U.S., great benefits, and we're making sure we kind of touch base. We're about to institute this 360 review, where we send out a survey, and we're going to do 360 reviews on us, on the management. How are we doing? Okay. It's not. Some of those things aren't easy to read sometimes, but we want to make sure that the employees' culture remains at the sort of as the founding. How are we doing? What are we doing as the mission of Hamamatsu and marketing in particular to better the science and technology through the use of light? Photon is our business, is the buzz phrase for Hamamatsu, and so anything to do with the photon and how it's sort of enhancing the human experience is what we're focused on. Yeah, and I think that actually there's a fair, Photon Fair it's called, every 5 years in Hamamatsu City that we put on, and some of the employees go back to just see what's being done with light. Yeah. And we bring customers there once in a while. This year we did a little mini Photon Fair at Photonics West, a conference as well, just to give a taste of that here in the U.S.
This is all and I didn't send this question ahead of time, so feel free to, and if you can't talk about it, say I can't talk about it, or I have no idea. But AI, it's everywhere. I mean, what is I'm sure Hamamatsu is
happy to talk about
bringing it in or looking at it. What any sort of anything you can discuss as far as AI and how it's being incorporated, whether it's into your business, technology. I know this could be a whole podcast interview. Yeah, we could quickly. Any AI.
Keep going. All right, so quickly.
I know we're getting close to time here.
Whatever your time is, I'm fine with it. But touched on it briefly. 2 uses within Hamamatsu. I mean, even the salespeople are just diving into it. There's like, write me this email. Can this thing be faster? How do I cold call somebody? Because they're not even used to cold calling, but now they're thinking, okay, can I get an email? That's one use of it, and we got to be a little judicious about that and careful, especially on our marketing material and the website. Japan, our parent company is very anxious about, when I say anxious, worried about the use of it. In many ways, if you throw into ChatGPT what kind of detectors are in a flow cytometer, you might get all kinds of things. You know, we might get cameras and that sort of answers because it's sampling everything.
Okay.
And if we're going to incorporate it into our website in a chatbot or something like that, it needs to be trained specifically to focus on we're not in the business to send them off to our competitors,
Sure.
for example. However, and we don't want to give the wrong answer.
Yep.
Like send somebody down a path that's incorrect. So we have live chat support as well as AI incorporated in. We haven't made the AI sent it out to the public yet. It's something we're looking at as part of maybe 2 chatbots at the same time. If you need a person, talk.
Yep.
If you don't, then you might be able to get something faster. So that's internally and using it here. Externally, we are partnering with a lot of people. The digital pathology space in particular is booming with this diagnosis, and they are getting 510Ks and FDA approvals for AI diagnostics, and a number of software companies. And I'm not saying whether we would. This is a whole area we haven't even talked about. Is acquisition, mergers and acquisition. Marketing tends to get involved in these potential partnerships with companies. But we do already have engagements with companies that use AI to do those diagnostics on our slide scanners.
Okay.
So it's definitely at forefront. And with there's some big companies that are exploring into this. And they, not just
it's happening fast.
Not just on the web. They're looking at healthcare for sure.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah.
Well. Last thing I have, any advice you would give to our graduate trainees watching that, whether it's looking to pursue a career in this field or just advice for if they're about to defend and getting ready to jump into the job market, anything you can leave us with?
Yeah, I mean, so you got the sampling of all the kind of bouncing around there I did, and I'd say just explore the unconventional things. Everything from that ski bum stuff to at first, but it was just that was just to get my feet in San Francisco essentially, and then finding a way into a biotech. So definitely explore the unconventional because you might find something that you really love. If you're thinking it's time to move away from the bench. What are some things you loved about the bench that were really that are things you can take with you so that you're because I honestly my PhD is felt like I've used it throughout my entire career, regardless of whether I'm in industry or in any type of just sales position. It's still been instrumental. I guess the second thing I'd say is I find myself always talking to our not always the junior people, but people that didn't have experience in bioscience, and thinking, okay, there aren't. I think some of your other podcast or some of the other interviewees on Next Steps have said this. There's not any stupid questions, and there isn't. But those people are afraid to ask questions in bioscience. So whether it's junior or people that aren't as experienced in it give them the answers, or ask the questions if you're not sure, because our business in DNA sequencing is either is booming at times, and then it's off at other times. But no one in this mechanical and electrical engineering community of Hamamatsu really knew why. And a lot of it was due to the fact that there was genotyping going on. The 23andMe's were happening. Illumina was coming up and coming. So try to find a niche that says, okay, I've got this expertise. I'm going to help people with answer those questions in non-conventional areas, right?
Yep.
And things like, why would that light detector be needed?
Yeah. All right.
So that's my end.
I appreciate that.
Sure.
And if folks want to reach out, is there a good place to do that? Can they hit you up on LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn's good.
Okay.
I'm a little slow. I'm definitely like
Sounds like you're a little
backlogged.
busy traveling.
No, I'm busy and traveling. I'm a little slow on it. But absolutely, I love connections with the University of Rochester. I'd love to connect, and then if there's, just keep pinging me, and we'll hopefully have a conversation.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for all this time.
Yeah.
I'm sure so many great nuggets some of our trainees and graduates can take away today. Again, if you don't get a chance to tune in live, this will be available as a full podcast wherever you listen to it. If you think of a question after and still want to post it, feel free to jump in the comments or reach out to Jamie on LinkedIn. We'll put the link to his profile here in the comments as well. But thanks for tuning in, and Jamie, thanks again for all the time.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Yeah, it was great.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the latest episode of the Next Step podcast. If you liked what you heard, please share with other members of the University of Rochester community or anyone you think could benefit from these career stories. And we wish you nothing but the best in your own career journey. Until next time.